All right, in this video, I want to talk about the value and power of being judgmental. This is something which probably just the title alone, just the mere suggestion of this, very likely engenders a variety of emotional responses, i.e. judgments, and triggers off a whole narrative, especially if someone is spiritual or religious or in the self-help world. So generally the most common viewpoint as it relates to judgmental, being judgmental, how people use this term. First, often how it's used is, I don't like your opinion, I don't agree with what you're saying, I want to derail or take this conversation in another direction, so I'm going to throw a stick in the spokes and just say, oh, you're being judgmental, which is a pretty judgmental and limiting thing to say, and also generally not that useful or effective, but it's a way of passive-aggressively manipulating a conversation through guilt and shame and blame to try to further our own agenda or narrative or whatever. That's usually how it's used. In another common usage, especially in the self-help, spiritual, alternative type world, is being judgmental is bad. So we shouldn't do it, because being nice, being compassionate, and having acceptance is better. Now, if that's not obvious, that's a pretty judgmental thing to even say. That's a pretty evaluative, limited perspective, and already contains a huge amount of confusion, misinformation, judgment, and misunderstanding, which can cause a lot of problems. This is going to be a bedrock belief system for us, a bedrock of action, which it rather is for quite a lot of people. And as a result, quite a lot of people stay disempowered and confused and basically in denial. Because the reality of the situation is that all of us are judgmental all the time. This is a natural function of the body. So saying this is bad and we shouldn't do it and instead we should try to be another way is like saying eating food is bad, so I'm just not going to do it. Drinking water, that's bad, I'm just not going to do it. It just doesn't make any sense and will never, ever, ever be successful. A good example of this, not to poke too much fun, but this is just really someone who has all types of books and seminars about judgmental detox and being free from judgment, is this person, Gabrielle Bernstein. And her demographic and target market seems to be kind of women, younger women, around 20s, 30s, 40s, I guess, in that demographic from what I've seen. But again, could be wrong. But it's just a good example of this because it's the whole thing is judgment about being judgmental, which I can see the functional benefit in that instance for that group, because it's a lot of women who have been basically very harsh on themselves and their self-worth is really low. Their self-worth is not in a good place. They probably have bad boundaries. They probably have a lot of issues. So they're thinking that, oh, it's just because they're judgmental and they need to just accept themselves and love themselves, then that will solve the problem. The problem really is that there's a lot of disempowerment still, even though it appears on the surface, according to the marketing, oh, I'm empowered, which maybe we're more empowered, but in reality, still functioning from denial and confusion because we never actually were honest and developed any understanding or discernment or usefulness for this inherent natural function. We just said, oh, it's bad, so we should do what's good. That really is as complex as what you would tell a child, but we're all adults, so we're obviously going to need something a bit more complicated. And the other thing is that this view, this methodology, this behavior is in and of itself very rigid, very stuck, and inherently dishonest. Which is why generally it just tends to lead to more of the same thing. Meaning, what I mean by rigid and stuck, meaning if your viewpoint is, oh, well, being judgmental is bad and I just have to be acceptance and be nice and be compassionate and be those other things, that's a very fixed, rigid point of view. But we don't notice it because we tell ourselves, oh, but it's good. It's better to be that way. My life will be better. I'll be a better person. I'll have better relationships. People will be whatever. I'll have better whatever. Fill in the blank. The problem is that's inherently incredibly judgmental, incredibly confused, misinformed, and based in misunderstanding and denial, which is not that functional. And again, I'm not saying, anyways, I'm not going to go on that tangent. So really getting to more of a functional, useful thing is basically, first is being able to be honest with ourselves and acknowledging and being able to observe how we're interacting in this way. Maybe we are very judgmental. Maybe we are not really judgmental, but usually angry and defensive, usually fixated on a belief, fixated on some self-image, and inherently pretty self-absorbed. So if we're inherently really self-absorbed, getting into denial or getting just deep into more self-love might not be that useful. What I think is actually more loving and useful is developing honesty with ourselves, developing understanding of our behavior and our actions and our motivations, developing discernment to be able to distinguish the usefulness of those thoughts, of those beliefs, of those actions, of those behaviors. Meaning, this is also a really common thing when people are really judgmental. What happens is they're become so stuck and fixated on a belief, on a view, on a self-image. For the rest of their life, they're still on that thing. So that's obviously not very useful. If we can use this natural capacity through developing honesty, understanding, discernment to arrive at informed action, which leads to growth, constant change, and flexibility, then that would actually be a bit healthier and a bit more productive. So for example, if a person has been over here in their whole life, let's say they've been, just to go to extreme, they've been a doormat. They don't speak up for themselves. They don't honestly express their views. They don't honestly express their opinions. They're in a lot of relationships and situations which are disharmonious, based on falsehood and whatever. Loving themselves and getting into self-help and just like throwing away their judgmental capacity is just taking a weakened reflex and making it weaker. Instead of developing some honesty, being able to look at ourselves and those situations as best we can, and developing understanding and discernment. So really, sometimes the most loving and helpful thing we could do is to tell someone to fuck off, to tell ourselves to fuck off, to say, oh, I'm just tired of engaging in this stupid behavior and making myself suffer. I'm tired of just making myself miserable, so I'm not going to do it anymore. Or I'm going to try to find something a bit better or more, something I actually enjoy. Sometimes it's really a matter of that. And it's a process. It's basically a process of growth and evolution. So it's difficult to say ultimately one thing is better than the other, you should or shouldn't do, because sometimes it really depends on where we are on that path. But the vast majority of the time, people are here. They haven't spent a lot of time developing these qualities. Because basically, if we're not able to develop growth, movement, self-knowledge, and the capacity for observation, then we really don't develop a capacity for true acceptance of ourselves and subsequently acceptance of other people. And that's generally the foundation. And this is why I say this is empowered and this is disempowered. This is disempowered because you're stuck in a very limited viewpoint that is not really based on anything other than repressing yourself, controlling other people, and just another form of emotional manipulation most of the time, versus this is based on honesty, understanding, discernment, and usefulness. Meaning, if you're more honest with yourself, you have more understanding of yourself, your actions, your behaviors, your motives, your rationale, then you can have more discernment to say, you know what, that's pretty useful, and that's just completely stupid, or that's just me being insecure. No big deal. Everyone has insecurities. Everyone gets angry, they get upset, they get happy, they get sad. This is kind of normal and natural, but I'm probably going to stop overemphasizing it and denying it, because denial is a form of overemphasis. The more you deny something, the more you give it power. But if you develop the ability to do the things on this side, then perhaps you lead to more acceptance, which is a more empowered point of view and naturally changes the quality of our minds so that we become more flexible, we become more open to growth, and actually able to take informed action. Because sometimes maybe we have a job, maybe we have a natural capacity to walk into a situation and immediately, these are the things that are off, these are the things that are on, here's how we fill in the blanks and get to a more harmonious place. That's a really useful skill. If you're a practitioner of some type in healing, if you're a consultant with design of many types, that's obviously a useful skill. But if we're stuck in, oh, well, it's just bad, so we shouldn't do it, it's really not that helpful or useful. And so hopefully this makes sense. It's just something that's so common and just generally leads to a lot of problems. For example, I would gamble to assume that people stuck in this probably have a lot of digestive disorders and issues with their menstrual cycle, just because of the way these viewpoints affect the liver and constrains the emotions and constrains the blood flow in the body. So that has a pretty predictable knock-on effect throughout the course of our development. So hopefully this has been helpful. Just something to think about. Obviously, again, like I said, it's a process of development. It's not necessarily a fixed outcome. What I'm saying is not a fixed belief or idea. It's something more so to reflect upon and consider and look at in our own lives and just kind of have there, and hopefully start to develop more capacity towards self-knowledge, observation, and honesty. Which again, I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying it's particularly comfortable all the time. I'm not saying it's particularly enjoyable all the time. But most things in life that are worth anything generally require some degree of discomfort, because that's part of growing. But if we're saying, oh, well, I already believed this, but then this thing told me this, which is kind of what I already believe, and it makes so much sense, and it's just what I've, the savior I've been looking for, then we probably need to take a step back and be a little bit skeptical, because it's probably just the same thing, just repeating itself, which can be very entertaining, can have emotional catharsis, can create all types of stimuli on the nervous system, all types of emotional journeys, and etc. But that doesn't necessarily equate to the development of specific qualities and skill sets within our own awareness. So hopefully that helps, and I'll talk to you soon.